Good evening and welcome to Bast. For the first time, we are hosting this roundtable in English, as the crisis in Iran has clearly moved beyond the domestic issue and has become a matter of regional and global consequence. Over the past week, Iran has witnessed one of the bloodiest crackdowns in its recent history. While the full scale of casualties remains unclear, reports indicate widespread lethal force against protesters. At the same time, we're seeing a significant U.S. military buildup in the Persian Gulf. President Trump's recent statements, combined with shifting rhetoric from Washington, has added to the uncertainty. This raises urgent questions. Are we approaching a decisive geopolitical turning point? Is the Islamic Republic entering its final phase? And if Ali Khamenei were to fall from power, what comes next? Could Iran witness a controlled elite transition similar to Venezuela's managed shift within the system? Or are we heading towards fragmentation, confrontation, or something entirely unexpected? To discuss these critical questions, I'm honored to be joined by three distinguished guests. Professor Mansour Farhang, former Iranian diplomat and professor of international relations in the United States, Irfan Noorbakhsh, independent political analyst focusing on Iranian domestic dynamics and state structure, and Kianush Boustani, leftist political analyst based in the UK, known for his structural critique of power and class in Iran. Thank you all for being with us. Let me begin with Professor Farhang. Professor Farhang, from your perspective as an international relations scholar, how do you interpret the current U.S. military buildup in the Persian Gulf? Is this deterrence, psychological warfare, or preparation for something more decisive?
There are different perspectives in the United States. The right-wing people very close to Israel, they think the purpose of the United States should be regime change in Iran, regardless of discussing the expenses or the consequences or using the examples of such effort in Iraq or in Vietnam or in Afghanistan, Libya, and so on. But there are other elements who think this will be costly to the Republican Party and to the right-wing people because bombing Iran or even the limited number of ground troops in Iran could lead to a civil war that inside the country, and it would be difficult for the United States to contain the expansion in terms of time or the expansion of this. So this argument, and Trump, in a sense, is playing that game. On the one hand, he threatens Iran, but at the same time, he really doesn't want to do anything that would jeopardize his position in the United States and fundamentally his economic positions. He is a trader, and both psychologically, one could say he's a pathological narcissist, but at the same time, in my opinion, he also behaves like a mafia head. He's a combination of both, that he's not a normal mafia head. At the same time, when it comes to interest of his family, interest of the people associated with him, he's very much interested in winning, and by winning, he fundamentally has material advantage in mind. So this is the situation. But what is really, and on the other hand, the Republican position, as I explained, but in the Democratic position and the more progressive elements in the United States, they're very much opposed to sending ground troops to Iran because they refer to the examples of the past and they see this to be a violation of American national interests and so forth. But at the same time, I have to say that the United States, at least since World War II, is faced with a new situation and a new leader whose positions and priorities and interests do not fit the kind of analytic perspectives that the academicians or experts in foreign policy or international relations have produced over 80 years. So what we see in the United States in the media is full of confusion, uncertainty, frustration, raising questions. On the other hand, the man has been elected by a majority of American people, and he has the majority in Congress. So they have limits in questioning his legitimacy, but they definitely question his wisdom and his priorities. The United States, with respect to its foreign policy, as someone who has written about American foreign policy and published over the past 50 years, I can say the United States has not really been faced with this kind of domestic conflict and contradiction probably since the Civil War or since late 19th century, that the President of the United States and his supporters refer to the rivals as enemies, literally as using the rivalry does not exist, animosity exists. And this is new in American politics so far as I know. So we don't know what they will do. What they will do in Iran, I would say the last point I have to make, if they have evidence that Iran is moving toward building nuclear weapons, that is, the potential capability of Iran is moving toward its actualization, there is no question in my mind that they will bomb Iran. Bombing Iran doesn't mean that it could even strengthen the regime inside the country and put the people in a passive position and suffer the economic consequences of this bombing. But it will not lead to destruction or overthrow of the regime simply by bombing them. The only conceivable way the United States could act with the purpose of overthrowing the regime is send at least 400,000 to 500,000 ground troops to Iran without knowing exactly how long it will take to accomplish their objective. So the United States is also faced with dilemma. One country that definitely wants war and wants continuation of confrontation and the use of force by the United States is Israel. And so far, the Israeli lobby in the United States has been effective in influencing the position and priorities of President Trump.
Yes, absolutely. We have a very polarized United States in terms of foreign policy, and also the impact of the Israeli lobby definitely has to be taken into consideration. Erfan, you've closely analyzed the structure of Iran's security apparatus. The recent repression appears both brutal and coordinated. What does this tell us about the regime's level of confidence or fear?
Thank you. You know that this time we had different parts and different elements of the regime that actually participated in the oppression, the protesters. We shouldn't forget the context. After 7th of October 2023, Israel rised up as a global hegemon in defeating all the axis of resistance in the region. And then all of this axis of resistance, we know that it was, of course, it was all go back to Tehran. Is a linking part, and inside IRGC, inside the Quds troops, the morale was very down after defeating it started to crack down, actually to spear crack, and then we had the 12 days war that. Of course, Iran could repulse a little bit, but was not completely successful. So they needed something like a morale booster inside the security forces, inside the IRGC. And when the protest starts and the regime somehow feared that could be fatal this time, because this is the first time that we have a leader who actually call upon the people to come out and they listen to him. We didn't have such a thing in the last time Women Life Freedom movement. It was different elements that they just stick together, and opposition bloc couldn't even define a united bloc. As you remember, after two months or something, they just disbanded. But this time there was something against Islamic Republic that they are always feared of. Islamic Republic, they do not fear of they are not the military intervention or the foreign intervention actually do not scare them. What is scared them is the same the same experience they had in Revolution 1979. What was that? In Revolution 1979, there was a leader, and also the security forces inside the regime are not willing to, and the Shah are not willing to actually oppress their protests. So, this is the only history lesson that Islamic Republic have learned, and all the time try to avoid such a situation. So this time, when they saw clearly that there is a leader who calls upon the people and people come out, they ordered the Quds group from the IRGC to enter the country, because not all of them are based in Iran. Some of them are in Iraq, some of them are in Lebanon even. And they just joined united, came inside the Iran and brutally oppressed and purged actually the protesters, and it gave them a morale boost. It was because they were briefed something like this: Israel right now inside Iran. This is your battlefield. Go and come back winner. So it doesn't matter how many people you kill. The most important thing that we know is a total defeat, and total defeat for the opposition, and total victory for us. So right now is actually
Are you, excuse me for interrupting, but are you suggesting that the bloodshed in itself is a boost to the morale of the
they
security apparatus?
felt that we don't know exactly right now what is happening inside. We can just by based on some elements we can guess and go. But they really, at the last 2 years, the morale inside IRGC and its affiliates all around the Middle East was very low, because they had defeat after defeat from against Israel, and they really needed something to show that Muhammad, that's not the first time happened. This is not the first time that happening in history. I just give you an example. For example, in 1979, at the end of 1979, when Soviet troops wanted to enter Afghanistan, they were briefed something like this: you are going inside Afghanistan to remove the American and Chinese elements who infiltrated the Afghan population. And when the Soviet troops comes, it's based on their recalls after the war and interviews after the war. They said, when we entered, we were looking for Chinese, we were looking for the Americans. There was none. We were not briefed like that, because if they said that your mission is to go and topple another regime and get control of the country, there was they couldn't do it somehow morally. But that's what happened actually in Iran. They were told that, look, now you have a clear time. Now you have a clear chance to redeem against Israel and what you defeated from. So this time Israel is inside Iran. You cannot. You can just purge it. You can just remove all the elements. You can kill. That's why every day we just hear more and more horrible numbers of victims.
Thank you very much. It appears that they've tried to boost their morale by attacking a very soft target, which is the Iranian population, which is very sad indeed. Kianush, from a leftist analytical framework, how should we understand this uprising? Is it primarily political, economic, generational, or all three?
Well, in real world, Mehmet, there is no distinction between political and economical or generational or any other analytical distinction. But for sake of analysis, we could say that the economical situation provided a structural ground for this uprising. We know that since at least since 2000, 2008, 2007, Iranian economy has been stagnating, which means our GDP were growing at 0% or less than 0%. The inflation is enormous. It's one of the biggest in the world. And the level of unemployment is very high, especially in some provinces like Ilam or like Charm al-Bakhtiyari or Sistan Balochistan. Even it's higher than the average national average. The economical elements are the structural elements, but it needs some political ignition. to come to the surface. I believe that the repressive approach of Islamic Republic of Iran at every level, because it's almost the only language that they understand in terms of governance. It ignites that economic situation. And the other element is generational, which the new generation is connected to the global scene more than our generation, and that they understand the individualistic character is more strong than us, and they understand something. They increasingly understand that this is my right. I have to get this right. I don't give a damn if the government or if the religion or anything else that don't want me to get that right. So all these elements all together in reality played at the same point, and we face this uprising. I am not that kind of leftist reductionist to reduce everything to economic. Actually, the economy is not just about financial transaction, or social classes. Economy is sort of encapsulation of the political. It's not just about the economy itself. So, to my opinion, all these elements play together at some point during a time, at least in 10 years, in last 10 years, and then grew to the level that now it seems that it's been stopped by brutal repression. Reports of killing of more than 20,000 people in only 2 days. It's historical records. It hasn't happened anywhere else. But this is not the end game. Because the problem is there, and the problem is structural, and Islamic Republic has no mean to stop it or to contain it.
Basically, it can't address the fundamental issues, which are the demands of the protesters. I think that's what you're saying. Thank you very much for that. Professor Farhang, do you see any realistic scenario in which Washington would directly intervene militarily in Iran? Or is this more about shaping internal power calculations within the regime? Because that's increasingly what we are hearing.
We have to understand that Trump is not interested in democracy. He is not interested in human rights. In fact, it's incredible that so far as I know, he is the only president of the United States since World War II, and perhaps even before that, whose speeches and whose interviews do not include the word human rights or the word democracy. It's fascinating because, after all, this country has been pushing that idea since its foundation as the way of distinguishing itself in international relations. He is categorically rejected, and even internally, he questions so that's really the point. What they can do, if they can find elements within the Iranian regime, dictatorial, no matter how dictatorial they might be, if they're open to normalizing the economic and trade relations with the United States, putting an end to the nuclear program, and putting an end to anti-Israeli propaganda. Today, they are not really concerned about the Syria or Hezbollah or even and other groups, Shi'i groups that Iran has influenced since the revolution. They have been defeated. They at the present time and for the foreseeable future, these groups do not represent a threat to Israel. But what could present a threat to Israel is an Iran with nuclear weapon. I know that Iran, as probably like other countries possessing nuclear weapons, they describe it, they analyze it, and they, in terms of their motivation, that they want to prevent. They think nuclear weapon will prevent the temptation of other countries to attack you, and there is some truth to that. No question about it. So that is really the nature of and I would say when Khamenei dies, so long as Khamenei is in power, I doubt very much there will be any kind of fragmentation and division within the Iranian regime. As we saw, even Khamenei, Pezeshkian, Zarif, and the rest, they all supported the regime in this pathological genocide they have committed against the Iranian people. In other words, the people who have been so-called reformists in Iran, people who seem to be criticizing certain policies, what they have in mind has nothing to do with the nature of the regime. They say, if we do not improve our economic and trade relations with the Western world, it threatens the stability and the continuity of the regime. That is to say, the protection of the Islamic Republic, the way it is ideologically with respect to its relationship with the Iranian people, we need to contain our animosity with the outside world and normalize trade and economic. This is repeatedly they said. Whenever they come to the point that they have to make a choice that could be critical of Khamenei, they have never done that. They have never done that. So in that, however, we don't really know about the nature of the revolutionary guards. We don't know about the nature of the so-called army or even the intelligence apparatus. We know that they have accomplished, the Iranian regime has accomplished two important things over the past 47 years with respect to its own survival. One is creation of a dominant class. That is to say, exactly what we said, the elite, the dominant class with respect to wealth. And in fact, it's ironic to say that economic differences in class differences today is worse than it was under the Shah. And this was with respect to the economic situation. So it's conceivable that once Khamenei leaves and they're not able to agree on, so that there will be fragmentation and division within the regime. And it has happened before in other countries, as we see, for example, in Venezuela today. That in other words, the rest of the autocratic people in control of the society, continuation of the rule becomes more important. So dismissing someone or getting rid of someone or even compromising with respect to certain issues with the United will be open option. Here, the only hope that we have is, are the people committed to a democratic Iran, people committed to a Republican Iran, committed to human rights, committed to dispersion and diversity of opinions, which are inevitable in Iran. If we have this organization, in my opinion, has a basis in the public at large. But unfortunately, we have not created this nahad, this institution that could present an alternative to religious fascism dominating our motherland. This is extremely important. In the absence of an organized and effective institution with clear commitment to democratic pluralism and so forth, it's the division within the regime will not necessarily move toward any kind of change with respect to domestic policy. But there is no question in my mind that the people who have come to power, given the corruption, given the accumulation of the wealth, and given the fact that they're sending their children abroad and their lifestyle where they live and their lifestyle in general, there is no question, in my opinion, they're willing, they are not coming. Remember, the Iranian Revolution, it was the only revolution over the past over two centuries since the American and French Revolution. In fact, I would say the only social movement, the only political movement in the world which is fundamentally anti-egalitarian. It has nothing to do with justice. It has nothing to do with democracy. It has nothing to do with national interest. It has nothing to do with the future of Iran. It's, as Khomeini said, if we could make hijab, veiling, mandatory in Iran, revolution has succeeded. Or Khamenei says, the short skirt of woman is more dangerous than American military. We might make fun of these statements. We might be funny, but they really connect. If we read what they have written, unfortunately, we had never read them before the revolution. If we read what they have written and in their speeches and all that, this anti-enlightenment, opposition to Roshangari, what we say, that is the individual. In other words, they're absolutist thinkers. They know everything. And they imagine the past and remember the future. They know exactly the past is not a matter of analysis and looking at factual situation. It's ideology. It's certain ayah, surah, ravayat, وغير ذلك, coding certain people and saying that it will. And then when it comes to the future, they're absolutely certain about the future. Even if you die, you will go to heaven. And if you, you see, in other words, this kind of pathological ideological thinking, which is very close to Stalinism, to Hitlerism, to Mussolinism, that is to say opposition. And Khomeini says all the badbakhti we have in the country is because of national interest. And he says national interest is against nationalism, is against Islam. There is in this Islamic regime, particularly Khamenei and his close associates, they often use the 1953 coup as an example or as a reason for animosity they showed toward, which is an absurd lie, because Khomeini was opposed to Mossadegh. Ayatollah Kashani and Ayatollah Behbahani, after the release of the latest evidence from the CIA documentation, they received economic assistance from the United States in order to organize their supporters against Mossadegh and in favor of the coup. In other words, and many other, there were also some clerics, some ayatollahs who supported Mossadegh, but the influential, and after the revolution, these people became heroes of Khomeini. In other words, a good number of people who had supported the military coup took important positions within the structure of the Islamic Republic. This people do not really talk about, and unfortunately, in the United States, that's I thought we were going to discuss the leftists. Unfortunately, the leftists do not pay attention to. The leftists assume in the United States that that Islamic Republic is supporting the Palestinians. Far from it. The Islamic Republic is supporting the most radical, the most right-wing people in Israel. In other words, Netanyahu and Khomeini are intimate enemies.
Absolutely. We will come back to this, Professor. I want to.
What I want to say with respect to, so these are the variables and factors that influence the political elite in the United States. But the only hope we have that the calculation or analysis or of the political elite after Khomeini goes to heaven or hell or wherever he will go, that there is an alternative. There is an organized, systematic alternative, which I prefer to be, a Republican, Republican institution, democratic, not having an uncontested leader, but having elected a committee of its leaders, a committee that is subject to change and modification of the people. In other words, waiting for another uncontested leader is a mistake. Unfortunately, this has been our tradition, but the tradition has always led to one dictatorship after another. What we need is the democratic preference, and the democratic preference for 2 years or 3 years. And if they're not moving in the direction of national interest and the security and economic justice in the society, the people are able to change them. This alternative is absolutely necessary if Iran is going to be free from centuries and centuries of oppression, injustice, and dictatorship.
Thank you very much for that, Professor. I am going to dedicate the second half of the roundtable to discussing the response of progressive parties and figures around the world towards the brutal repression of Iranian protesters, which has been very little, unfortunately. But I will come to that in my next question to Kianush. But before that, picking up on another point that Professor Farhang mentioned, Irfan, is it plausible that parts of the system might push for a controlled transition, perhaps sidelining hardliners while preserving the core power network? And I'm specifically talking about the Rouhani-Zarif combo?
Yeah, you know that we heard it so much time actually in global media about such a things. Even 2 days ago, Israeli channel 12, I think they claimed that Zarif was arrested because of such things. It's it's give me a little bit question. Is it real of what we know, or is it something that that uses as a psychological warfare against the whole? You know, one of the successful tactics, if you want to bring down a regime, you start by spreading false accusation about some elements inside the regime is going to come to you already or thinking about that. So what happens? Then the leaders start to crack down on them, start to purge them, and that's weaken the system. It could be like that, first of all. Second, after what happened in Venezuela, actually it become more realistic because now all the world can see that we have a president, as Honorable Mr. Farhang mentioned, that he's a president in the United States that doesn't care about human rights or democracy spreading. This is something doesn't care even about United States interest. It cares about his own and his own family interest. I believe that actually Trump is going to inherit legacy, and I'm not be shocked if in 3 years from now Eric Trump will be the next candidate for the presidency. I believe that's a project. So some part inside the regime, some part of they look at the Venezuela, they look at the signals who come from the Trump directly. For example, this is the time to change the leadership of Iran. First, second, I know Reza Pahlavi, he didn't even mention the name, sorry. I know him, he's a good person, but let's see who else will emerge. This is clear signals. Again, it could be psychological deception, or it could be real signals that I'm waiting if anyone can take control. Because you know that what is the differences between what we have in Venezuela or other countries, or for example, IRGC. IRGC is the main fighting force in Iran, not the regular army. Regular army is very weak, to tell the truth, but IRGC is the first. It is the first force that actually gets the best parts of the equipment and of the budget, and they are controlling the biggest part of economy. They are like a shareholder of big holding. So they are not when they defend actually the regime, they're defending their own interests. And CIA, Trump, anyone knows that, I hope. So they know, for example, if someone could be in control on IRGC, there will be no need to the bloodshed. Because if Trump wants to, let's say, repeat the Venezuelan scenario, he needs 2 months build up in whole region. And as we see from the Persian Gulf monarchies, of course, in secretly, they are in favor of removing the heads of Tehran, but they don't want it to do it from their soul. So that's why they're in public, they're opposed to that. We remember in 2010, WikiLeaks came out, and it was a cable between the Persian Gulf monarchies to General David Petraeus and other CENTCOM commanders that they were urging to cut off the head of the state in Tehran in order to remember that was a time that it was something like 2 years ago. Israel was preparing to attack to the nuclear facilities, but the Arab monarchies, they actually said that if you want to forever end the nuclear ambitions of Tehran, go bomb Tehran, not the Bushehr and other plants. So I believe they're still in favor of that, but they don't want to do it from their own soil. So that means that it makes it harder for US to do the logistics. That's why we have the aircrafts and all this buildup will have to come by the sea to project the power. So it makes it more harder. Iran is bigger than Venezuela. The population is far more bigger. So of course, Trump, as a genuine trader, real estate trader, he preferred to do it with less spending, more gaining. So he gives some signals. Let's see, maybe we have someone inside the regime who can control that. Just remove the Khamenei, I will do the deal with you. And as I told you, at the same time, maybe establishment in the United States made to this conclusion. There is no need to deal with anyone. I believe that Israelis don't want to deal with anyone inside the current regime. They prefer complete regime change, but it's still some part of US or Trump team. They like to see if anyone comes up and probably give them the golden key, and then he can share the power, or he can have power, something like as we saw in Venezuela. Yeah, it's possible.
Yes, I think maybe even the Israelis would be in favor of someone reaching the throne in Iran who would basically dismantle the ballistic missile program, dismantle the nuclear program, and cut ties with the proxies, with the the likes of Hashr Sha'bi and Hezbollah. Maybe they would be content with that, but we have to wait and see. Now, going back to the subject which Professor Farhang mentioned, Kianush, why has much of the international left been relatively quiet or slower to speak out in the face of what independent reports call one of the deadliest crackdowns in Iranian history?
Well, ever since this uprising, I've been in contact with a couple of them, and what I'm saying from now is I'm trying to reflect their mindset. Um, uh, First of all, it's not fair to say that literally or virtually all of them has been silenced. Some of them been very vocal, but the majority of them, unfortunately, been very silent on this point. So, the first thing is the issue of imperialism, as usual. Um, the mindset is like, okay, Iran is part of the resisting countries against U.S. imperialism and hegemonic aspiration in the world. So, no matter, or they tend to ignore that what's going on inside Iran in terms of exploitation, repression, economic apparent inequality, and things like that. They see it as a unified front against US imperialism and hegemony. Uh, the second is that's more important, it's Israel. Okay, international left is traditionally against Israel and see Israel as the encapsulation of all imperialistic hegemony, as colonial settler, which is last colony of West in the world, which is basically true. There is no wrong in this sort of analysis. But the wrong part is that the Islamic Republic propaganda that we are doing this in favor of Palestinian liberation cause. They can't understand, and I did my best to make them understand that it's not because of Palestinian liberation cause solely. It's because of each Islamic Republic geopolitical interest in the region. And Islamic Republic, at least in last 15 years, acting like a petty imperialist, small imperialist that acting like imperialist country, but not that in that hegemonical position like United States. A combination of these two, which comes together, make them to see every uprising in Iran suspicious. The second point is the white man hubris. White man's got a mindset which is even the leftists are like that. They think that they understand our issues better than us. We are kind of people that need some kind of attention, or we are not the subjects we have no agency. They have to sit around and cry for us, like Mr. Roger Waters. Every time in a concert, in a £1 billion concert, they put Mahsa Amini on the screen and start crying for that small girls who were being killed for not wearing mandatory hijab. Shame on you, Islamic Republic. And that's it. Once you start to express your agency, once you start to express that I can manage my affair in my way, they start being suspicious and say, okay, there might be Israeli intrusion in that. There might be American plot behind that. And it's very hard to convince them that it's not like that. Non-Westerners can talk for themselves. And it's not just about some extremist right people, white supremacists in the United States. It's even inside their leftists. This mindset is inside their heads and banging around in their heads. And they say, okay, they can't have some sort of agency for themselves. Non-Western people has always been subject to suppression and oppression, and they don't understand the modern world. But we have to hold their hands and drag them out. But once you stand on your feet, they become suspicious. Combination of all that make this shameful international left silence on this repression and on this crime against humanity in Iran.
It is so sad what you're referring
Sorry,
to.
can
The
I
fact
interrupt
that
for a second?
Sure.
I want to add something because to El Kianush, the same Roger Waters this time is in an interview with Piers Morgan. He said actually Iranians don't want regime change. Who said that? They don't want regime change.
Who the hell are you to say that?
Exactly. This goes back to what Kianush said, that even, I would say, hippie leftists consider Iranians as little brown people who are at most victims of their own fate, and they won't be, trying to find a way out of it. It would be up to us, the enlightened white people of the world, to decide for them. Professor Farhang, based on what Kianush said, some argue that the left's traditional anti-imperialist framework leads them to downplay atrocities committed by a regime that positions itself against US power. And it's not limited to Iran. We've seen it in other repressive regimes as well. To what extent do you think anti-imperialism has contributed to this silence?
I agree with the points Kianush made in general, but let me add a few ideas. You see, the Iranian Revolution in the United States as well as in Europe received significant support from the intellectuals and the leftists, the anti-Shah movement, no question about it. In the United States, I would refer to, for example, Michel Foucault's trip to Iran. It was extremely influential, the way the leftists and intellectuals in the Western world thought about it. And in the United States, someone I knew, a friend closely, Edward Said. Edward Said was an unconditional supporter of and I actually was promoting that support while the movement was going on, the peaceful movement. In other words, there were some influential intellectuals in the Western world who supported it. Not only that, it was also during the Cold War, and it was one revolutionary, dramatic movement that was not depending on the Soviet Union, depending on the communist forces. That is, in other words, that third world or the neutrality, as they claimed in the beginning, was highly respected by the intellectuals who were critical of American imperialism, but not in the sense of wanting to support the Soviet Union. So this of the popular support. And when we go to the Middle East, there's no question, because I traveled there during the period, the Iranian Revolution or the anti-Shah movement was extremely popular in the Middle East region. It was the first time that there was a movement, it was non-violent movement that was, and then what added, in a sense, to this perception, early perception, was the interviews Khomeini gave to a variety of people when he was in Neufchâteau. That he talked about freedom, he talked about respect for pluralism, and a book has been published about the lies and misperceptions he presented to the reporters. I interviewed Khomeini in early January 1970, shortly before he went to Iran. I was writing an article for Inquiry magazine in San Francisco. And in fact, during the same period, I was working with Edward Said, Richard Falk, Ramsey Clark, who were supporters of the Iranian Revolution. Even after the hostage taking, they went through the UN, and I was involved with them to see if they could persuade the UN to mediate the hostage crisis. So with that background, it's important to say that in the beginning, there was this positive and in fact, hopeful movement there. In my interview with Khomeini, I introduced myself as someone who lives in the United States. I've taught in the United States and lived there for many years. He interrupted me and said, I'm also a Talabé, and nothing I wish more than returning to home to resume my Talabegi duties. Talabé means religious student, which was music to my ear. At the time, as someone who had been involved in the anti-Shah movement since the 1953 military coup, I had written my dissertation on imperialism and the 1953 coup and so forth. So it was incredible. It was a very literally, as they say in the United States, music to my ear, and I repeated it. I mistaken it, just like many other Iranians, our perceptions, in fact, our ignorance, including my own ignorance about what he had written. If the Shah had permitted Kashf al-Asrar to be published in Iran, there is no question that people like you and I would have read the Kashf al-Asrar and said, this man is going to have power in the country or even be influential. So this is, and then when you come to the leftists, particularly over the past 2-3 years, that is the genocidal activities of Israel in Gaza and in not only that, I've been to Israel, I've talked to the Palestinian movement. Unfortunately, Palestinians have not been able to create a unified and peaceful, because Palestinians cannot gain their objective and their national rights through war and violence. They need a Nelson Mandela, they need a Martin Luther King, they need someone who could unify them and focus on peaceful means of achieving their objectives. And Netanyahu, the strategy of Netanyahu from the very beginning, it's very important with us to create fragmentation and atomization among Palestinians. In fact, he was helpful he approved of Qatar's giving $1.5 billion to Hamas. He knew that Iran was sending troops, training the Hamas troops in Iran and giving them. But he was supporting it. Why? He gave a lecture, which is a fascinating lecture in an article I wrote describing Netanyahu and Khamenei as intimate enemies. It was fascinating that a number of people in Israeli Knesset parliament criticized Netanyahu for agreeing with the assistance Hamas was receiving from Iran and from other Arab countries. His lecture was fascinating. He said, anyone who is opposed to the creation of a Palestinian state must support Hamas and other radical leftist groups who are opposed to the creation of an independent Palestinian. That is two-state solution, and therefore fragmentation and atomization was the purpose. And Iran was extremely helpful. And Yasser Arafat was the only person, the only Arab leader Khomeini accepted to visit him. And in fact, the visit was so nice that he's the only one who managed to put a smile on Khomeini's face. And he was regarded as the leader of the Palestinian people, and his representatives in Iran were treated with a great deal of respect and all that. And then when he decided to meet with Sharon, with Israeli Prime Minister in the United States and talk about peace, they immediately dismissed him as an Israeli agent and expelled his. In other words, Netanyahu, as Khamenei and Khomeini, they had very obviously very different objectives and different priorities, but they were completely together in the rejection of the creation of a Palestinian state or the two-state solution. And it helped. Remember that this is extremely important for Iranian people to understand, as well as the critics and the leftists, that Israel people, Jews, have suffered 2,000 years of discrimination, expulsion from every country, and genocide. It's a fact. So when someone describes these people as cancer, that have to be, it helps the right-wing people. Wherever in a society, insecurity becomes the priority of the population, right-wing, radical, fascistic people benefit from it. And this is exactly what Khomeini and Khamenei have contributed to the right-wing people in Israel and made it difficult for people of peace. I remember I wrote a letter in Persian and saying that if Iran is really interested in peaceful resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, they should invite Israeli peaceful activists to Iran.
Exactly.
And engage them in conversation. Of course, they do. So in the United States, which is perfectly understandable, I'm personally very delighted that criticism of Israel, condemnation of Israel for the genocide they have committed against the Palestinians is expanding in the United States, unprecedented. As I've taught in the United States for 42 years, and this is the first time that even when I go to college or to university to give a lecture, engage in discussion, it's fascinating to see the kind of criticism you hear from the students, particularly, so even the leftist element, they're really a minority. They're really a minority. But this minority is providing
very vocal
to the Iranians,
yes,
and to the people. In other words, they have become the instrument. They have provided instruments of deception, and pathological lies on the Iranian side, as well as on the right-wing Israeli side. So
absolutely.
This is the situation. I would say it's the responsibility of activists abroad, that is, people who are committed to democracy and human rights and respect for pluralism. It is up to us to engage. For example, I really urge Iranians knowing English to read this article. The editorial board of New York Times, the editorial board, on January 14, 2026, that is a week ago, has written a fascinating article about the nature of the Iranian, that is the nature of the Iranian regime, economically, politically, and socio-culturally. And I would say they really focus on the idea of the anti-enlightenment nature of this. In other words, in the United States, even the progressive criticism exists among the left, among the liberals, but also segments of the left, however small they might be, but they do get a lot of propaganda, and this propaganda helps Iran. So it can change. The change has to do with our activities. If we have an institution in the United States with, there are 8 million Iranians have come abroad. If we have an institution with 1,000 members, just 1,000 members, each member committing to pay $100 a year to support it. It is a modest objective, and yet it has not happened yet. And then the first thing we can do is to send an observer to the United. This organization, registered in the United States as well as in European countries, can send an observer to the United Nations. And in other words, not a member, as an observer to explaining the pathological violence committed against the Iranian people with the fascist rulers of the country. So this is actually a problem that can be addressed and can be solved, and there are many progressive people in the United States and in Europe who would help us. There's no question.
Yes, absolutely.
No question. But in order to make that help effective, in order to influence it with respect to containing the propaganda of the Iranian regime and also helping people inside the country, cannot do that. In the last word I have to say is that the Iranian activists abroad have a genuine historic responsibility. In the country, we have heard from time immemorial, the reason they cannot really explain their position is because of dictatorship. Whether Khuda Shah Mihan or Velayat Faqih, it doesn't make any difference. But abroad, we have freedom, we have security, we have economic resources, and we absolutely do not have shortage of knowledge and shortage of analytic ability, not at all. Absolutely. And yet we are not organized. We are
hoping to organize.
We are hoping
as you know, we are hoping
that organization is the best way to minimize or even to neutralize the marginal leftists who see Iran anti-imperialist and therefore anti-imperialist has to defend it, and also educating them. Iran is not helping the Palestinians. Iran is helping the right-wing radical people. And one person in the New York Times article that I think Iranians should read was Thomas Friedman. Thomas Friedman is himself Jewish. He covered the Middle East for the New York Times for 10 years.
Doctor, we're running out of time.
He wrote an article and said in Iran, we have Jewish Hezbollahis against Iranian Hezbollahis. That article is fantastic for Iranians to read, as well as the article by the
editorial
I mentioned it but in the New York Times. Anyway, this is the challenge facing us abroad and in the United States. So we have to work on that.
Thank you very much, Doctor. These discussions are part of the collective effort to create that opportunity for Iranian intellectuals, which you're talking about, and hopefully it will inspire the people who should be part and parcel of that to take tangible action. Irfan and Kianush, I have one question that I want to put to both of you. We only have 6 minutes to the end of the program, and each of you gentlemen would have 3 minutes to share your thoughts on that. If we were to meet again in 6 months, what is the most likely headline about Iran? And I know this is a bit kind of like trying to be a prophet, which is very risky in the Middle East, but based on your understanding, 6 months from now, we're meeting again, what would be the headline? I start with Irfan.
Okay. First of all, try to read the future. Is very difficult and it's impossible actually, especially when you talk about the social sciences. So draw, of course, some magazines they do that, but they go beyond what we believe in. But I believe in 2026 we have big changes in Iran. Some of them are positive, some of them unfortunately could be negative. So the headlines, of course, what I hope is a peaceful transition of power to better elements of the society or better part of the society, and starting to build after 47 years damages that came to our country from all part of economical, ecological society. You know, Iranian society is brave, but they need a huge time for recovery. A society who has been more than 20 years in crippling sanctions, unfortunately, is a sick society. It needs to be it's need time to recover. It's need time to rest. So there should be, as we know, that there should be other elements from outside who have the capacity, who have the capital, as Professor Farhang mentioned, that who should come in West and help, because Iranian society can go somehow, as it showed clearly in this protest, but it can't go all the way. So I hope to see such a title, Peaceful Transition of Power in Iran.
Thank you very much, Mr. Irfan Noorbakhsh. Kianush, you have the final word.
Well, Mohammed, I'm a sort of person tend to have hope without optimism. So I tend to, if you're in a tunnel, in a 10 miles tunnel, and you see, oh, I'm seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, I would say, no, that's another train coming our way. I try to be realistically hopeful, not optimist. I would say in 6 months' time, we will face more militarized state apparatus in Iran. Um, uh, People will have to lick their wounds because it was the biggest violent oppression in recent history in the world. Uh, and I would say in terms of economy, we are going to being something worse than Venezuela. Uh, and every element of that, it's existing now. But at the end of that, I would say we will face sporadic uprising and things like that. And that's stupid, I mean, imaginary Islamic Republic 2.0 project, which is part of Donald Trump minds. So, like Venezuela-style, is absolutely impossible. And if they are going to play around that, that cause more militarized state apparatus. Uh, because the ruling class in Iran, uh, surprisingly, is very intact. I'm talking about ruling class. I'm not talking about the political part of the ruling class. The whole ruling class, including a semi-governmental organization, bunyads, or even the individual capitalists or those who benefit from this system, they are surprisingly intact. And we can say they form like 3% of the population. And playing around that Islamic Republic 2.0 is very dangerous. And it causes more militarized and more closed society. In 6 months' time, so as I said, more militarized state apparatus, uh, worsen the economy situation, uh, the mass migration from Iran, and sporadic uprising, unfortunately.
I hope that what Erfan says happens, but unfortunately, I have to agree more with Kianush. I think we will be in Islamic Republic 2.0, and that is going to be a huge catastrophe because once again, they would have to use the repression apparatus to keep the public in check. Nobody likes the likes of Rouhani and whatnot, They're seen as complicit in the crackdown. Even over the past week, at the worst time, Khatami, who is their intellectual, I don't know, father or something, has come up in favor of the suppression and has described the protesters as agitators and foreign elements, and Rouhani himself as well. So, unfortunately, although I think that is going to fail eventually, and we will move towards a secular state at some stage. But I think in 6 months' time, we will be in the middle of Islamic Republic 2.0. With that conclusion, I would like to thank all our distinguished panelists, Professor Mansour Farhang, Mr. Kianush Bustani, Mr. Erfan Noorbakhsh. It has been an absolute pleasure for me to speak with you, gentlemen. And I hope we do this more and very soon. This was our first English language roundtable, and I'm very honored to have had you on the show. Thank you very much. And till we meet again, goodbye to you all.